Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bill Clifford, President and CEO of the World Affairs Councils of America. We're very pleased to bring you the second webisode in our new series, Embassy Row Live, and present to you Francisco Santos Calderon, Ambassador of Colombia to the United States. I want you to know that you are able, as audience members, to present questions in the chat box, which I will take in the second half of this conversation. Of course, you can ask the questions at any time, and I'll keep an eye on them as best I can. We want to get to all of them because we have a fascinating individual and a fascinating country and a great number of topics to discuss today. So with that, I want to actually present Ambassador Santos's bio in a little bit of depth because, as you know, we are recording this conversation and it's for future use. So I know some of you are already familiar with the ambassador, but please allow me to do this. Francisco Pacho Santos Calderon became Ambassador of Colombia to the United States in 2017. A former journalist and human rights advocate, Ambassador Santos served as Vice President of Colombia from 2002 to 2010. And as Vice President, he led Colombia's international promotion of trade, investment, and tourism, and implemented policies combating corruption, extortion, and kidnapping. Santos was head of debate for Colombia's Democratic Center Party in 2017, and 2 years earlier, he ran for mayor of Bogota on that party ticket. In 1980, and this is very interesting, Santos was kidnapped by the Medellin cartel, led by narco-trafficker Pablo Escobar. He was released after 8 months in captivity and went on to create the world's first non-governmental organization dedicated to fighting kidnapping. This case was also, by the way, covered the subject of a book by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Ambassador Santos, I would like to start this conversation. First, let me say a great welcome to you, and we're so pleased that you are coming to us for our second webisode with Embassy Row Live, and at a really interesting time because Ambassador Pompeo was in Colombia last month. The month before, we had Robert O'Brien, the US National Security Advisor, in Colombia as part of a regional trip. I want to start first by the issue that's on everybody's mind, which is COVID-19. President Ivan Duque has been largely praised internationally for the science-based approach he's taken to combating the pandemic in your country. But that being said, Colombia is now number 8 in the world in terms of cases with over 1 million, and the third largest source of cases in the region after Brazil, of course, and also Argentina. So could you assess for us really what's going on in terms of the pandemic there? Are you seeing a great number of spikes like we are elsewhere in the hemisphere? And how is the government combating it now? What are the political repercussions there?
Bill, thank you. And thank you very much for allowing me to speak in this very, very important forum, especially because in a world that is changing, in a world in pandemics, in a world where geopolitics is shifting, where you see the globalization moving and the East-West globalization changing into a North-South globalization, where you have the pandemic, where you have everything that's happening. This WACA creates a great way of touching in a lot of cities and citizens of the US that are interested in foreign policy, that will in some way impact foreign policy. So thank you for allowing me to talk in this very, very special forum. COVID is something that we're still learning about. And even if you make the perfect and exact decisions, it's almost impossible, especially for countries that weren't prepared, which was most of us, with the exception of Korea, Taiwan, to a certain extent, China, that had the SARS scares of 8-10 years ago and learned from it and learned contact tracing and were more prepared. Japan too. A lot of other countries, most of the countries decided to follow the same path, close down, and we had one of the toughest closures in the world.
Yes.
Build the capacity for testing. We didn't have capacity for testing, so we had to build it in the middle of competition from every country in the world to build it back up. Now we're I think we're in a good level of testing, and we keep testing and testing and testing. We decided also, and sometimes that's one of the problems of democracies, that municipalities, big municipalities, had to, with certain framework, they could decide how much to open or how much not to open. Our death rate is a lot lower. It's a lot lower than most of the developed countries and most of the middle income countries. So we have been able to adapt to that. Our closure allowed us to build up our ICUs, so that when we got the peak, which was sort of in July, we were ready for it. And we have been learning how to treat, so the mortality rate is even less so, and it's going down and down every day. Being said that, the destruction of value in Colombia, like everywhere else, has been huge. Hundreds of thousands of restaurants and small businesses have been crushed. Colombia has created a very big program of income for especially lower income families, and so they're getting a cash since day one. More than 4 million families are receiving that type of income, and that has allowed us that when the economy opened up, it immediately started picking up again. So we will foresee obviously a decrease in economic growth this year, but a very, very healthy recuperation next year, which we hope will be able to put us back to where we were at the beginning of 2020. If not, it'll probably take us a year and a half, maybe two at the most, to get back to where we were.
Let me pause here to
Sure.
come back with another question related to that, since you gave us that time frame. As you said, this lockdown, which was about a half a year, right, and
Yeah.
gave you the opportunity to create the space to build up ICU beds. If a new spike and the process does go another year or so, we're really talking about, we're halfway through President Duque's presidential term, and in 2022 there will be elections. So is there the tension that's happening in this country also? Are you seeing that in Colombia? Because
Yes.
my impression was you had this very good response, not only at the top level, but your mayors were acting very collaboratively and together. You were all sort of unified. But I think the question you meant, the point you made about small businesses, that's where I think the government has come under some criticism and pressure for not really accelerating that as much as maybe it could have.
Yes, obviously there's politics being played around this. Unfortunately, when you have a crisis like this one, populism rises up, and that's one of the biggest hindrances of what COVID is, and it's happening all over the region. It's happening, I would say, all over the world. This is so new for all of us that we make mistakes. We sometimes make decisions that aren't as quick as they should be. So this is absolutely natural in terms of how do you deal with COVID. There has been a very, very big amount of more than 3 billion pesos to help small businesses. The problem has been in the financial sector, which has been slow, because you have to give that to the financial sector. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have had. Many of those who needed the money couldn't get it fast enough, so that they could save many of those businesses. What I think it's important, and this is where where you have to look at the middle, at the game from here on, is that Colombia's fiscal situation isn't damaged. So we still have room for all the recovery and the soft loans that are going to be needed, and the government has provided and will provide even more so in the future for those businesses to recuperate or to come back. And I think that's going to be very, very, very important. The second is that Bogota, for example, has 3 very big infrastructure contracts that are going to start moving this year. The subway, and the subway is a $4 billion contract, probably the biggest public works program in Latin America. Is that subway that's going to start? So that's going to start picking up a lot of the employment. We have seen the numbers start coming back quicker than what we thought, and the opening up has allowed a lot of those small and medium-sized businesses to really come back on its feet. But the problem basically is how are we going to deal with the next year of COVID, which we're going to have to deal with. Obviously, I think masking in Colombia is sort of mandatory. And we need to enforce that, because if you enforce it, you can open up the economy, you can control a lot of other factors, and not have the huge spike that many other countries are having. Colombia had a big spike, and it didn't have a very big drop. It's dropping slowly. It's dropping slowly. So what are the
GDP projections? You're going to contract by 8 or 10%?
Between 8 and 9%.
Okay.
That's what we're going to lose. Our growth next year, the Republic Bank, the central bank says is going to be between 5 and 5.5. So we will recuperate most of it. Speaking with the finance minister a couple of days ago, he and with one of the members of the central bank, they said the numbers are not as bad as we had seen it, and the recuperation numbers are even better than we had forecasted. So we're still in the middle of a game that has a lot of surprises, because we've never had something like this. The U.S. had a GDP decrease of 31% in one quarter,
yes,
or during the pandemic, and then it had a recuperation of 30% in one quarter. So we're having those shifts in economic growth that frankly we hadn't seen for the past 70 years. But I think one of the things that the Colombian economy has is its resiliency. We were a country that survived such big social problems and violence problems. And many of those businesses were able to survive even the worst of those years of violence. So they understand what tough times are. They don't overspend. And that's a quality and a resiliency of the Colombian economy and of the Colombian businessmen that probably prepared them even better for what happened than many other businessmen all over the region.
That's a very important point. Are you you also closed the borders to most tourists, and they're just really you were locked down. Has that opened up at all?
A little bit slowly. Air travel has opened, not obviously with all the flights that we used to have. For example, Washington used to have a daily flight from Bogota. Now it has twice a week. Miami, Bogota used to be 8-10 flights every day. Now it's 2, sometimes 3 flights. So it's starting to and you need to have a COVID PCR test, so they won't let you come into the plane. Tourism, obviously, I think tourism and the aviation industry in Avianca had a very, very, very difficult time, and it's still with its water up to here. But but I think they have been able to get some refinancing and they will be able to come out of this. But tourism and the airline industries are probably the two industries that are going to take more to recover. And there's a special line of credit for all operators of tourism, hotels, airlines, etc., that the government has put forward. But in the end, you know, like always, many will survive, some will not. And it's unfortunate because Colombia in the past 20 years has changed so dramatically, had reduced the level of extreme poverty to less than 1 digit, had reduced the level of poverty from almost 57% in 2002 to less than 30% in less than 25% in 2017. We 2018. So we're going to lose some years of growth, and that's going to create a social conflict, which, by the way, is going to help many of the illegal organizations that are promoted from Venezuela, are promoted from outside the continent, because you know that in the middle of a lot of these protests, yeah, they have some element of national problems, but they have been fueled up from outside, and so we're in for a difficult ride in the next probably 2 to 3 years, and that's where we need a big leadership from the U.S. That's where we need the strength of the relationship between Colombia and the U.S., which is historic, which has always been bipartisan, which in the past 70 years, you look at Colombia's American allies in the region, and number one has always been Colombia.
Yes, let me just underscore that point. You are one of Latin America's oldest democracies. You're the fourth largest economy in the region. You're the US's number 3 trading partner, and a staunch ally, as you say, for combating terrorism, for promoting democracy in the region and beyond, for your participation in international organizations. One of the things you wanted to talk about was a new alliance for progress. And that harkens back to President Kennedy's Alliance for Progress in 1961, at a time when US-Latin American relations were really at rock bottom. This is after the CIA overthrew the government in Guatemala in the 50s. It was after Fidel Castro's rise to power in the late 50s. Nixon had made a visit as vice president to Venezuela that was very ill-received. And so Kennedy comes in and he wants to do something, and he promises billions of dollars of aid to the region over 10 years. And would you say it worked? First of all, what are you wanting to do with a new alliance from progress? You're in a better place, perhaps, than Kennedy was. But what are you drawing on, and what do you imagine this will be?
Look, the Alliance for Progress was aid. What we need now is trade. What we need now is investment. The consolidation of the economic model in many of our countries needs a push to increase employment, to increase quality of employment, to increase the amount of taxes that they're received, and that can only be done. And Colombia is a perfect example, and Colombia has sort of become the pilot project of what I hope will become a long-term U.S. policy for the region, with Colombia Crece and with America Crece, and with a couple of policies that are starting to be put together. But what we really need is for the U.S. to look into Latin America as real partners, where you have more than almost 500 million souls that can become great consumers, that can become a really part of an economic supply chain, just like as Mexico is, that can go from Canada all the way to Argentina. And with what is happening, and as I said in the beginning of the conversation, with this globalization moving north-south and ending the east-west. The dependence on China, which COVID just showed very, very clearly, the dispute with China, which I think is going it's not going to go away. It's not going away. It's a great opportunity for what is now called nearshoring. Many companies that put all their eggs in China are saying, maybe that's not such a good idea. We went from a just-in-time economy to a just-in-case economy. COVID proved the weaknesses of the supply chains of many American companies. And we're seeing that, we're working that to get many of those companies to look into Colombia. And so in this context, what you see right now, that's where the Alliance for Progress that idea comes through. The U.S. has looked into, and this administration, into a few issues that I think, or a few ideas that I think are worth, and no matter who wins the election, are worth building on. One, the DFC. The Build Act of 2 years ago changed OPIC into the Development Finance Corporation. That Development Finance Corporation can give money to loan, can become partner with companies. It doesn't have only to be American companies. It was sort of created to counteract one of the biggest, what I would call one of the biggest advantages of the Chinese, which is the capital that they bring to many of the the contracts that they win. With the DFC, which has $60 billion, small amount for what is going to be needed, but a big push that needs to start flowing into Latin America. We're working to see American companies that want to move into Colombia, how we can put them together and how they can finance those. And we have in the pipeline 3 or 4 projects, big projects that can sort of start moving in that direction and show. And these small projects can all of a sudden become a cascade of companies that want to move into Colombia, because Colombia can become a hub for exports to the rest of South America. We're the belly bottom of Latin America. We're 5 hours from New York and 5 hours from Buenos Aires, and 7 hours from Los Angeles in plane. So América Crece and Colombia Crece are part of that pilot project that we hope will make the creation of this nearshoring, new globalization part of American companies' policy of saying, we need another foot on a region different than Asia, and we want to have it in Latin America. And obviously, as Colombian ambassador, I want it to be #1 Colombia. So we've sort of become the pilot project in that. We're working very closely in something called América Crece, which is very, very important. Yeah.
Colombia Crece is Colombia Grows and America Crece, America Growth Initiative, if you will, if I'm translating those correctly. Yeah. And there are 3 aspects of this that I want to get into. One is, it seems that this, at least the America Growth Initiative, which Colombia signed on to in August, right?
Yeah.
The meetings with National Security Advisor O'Brien. That's where this was really sort of unveiled. It seems like this is the American infrastructure investment response to China's Belt and Road Initiative. And China actually has more countries signed up in Latin America. I think it's 19 to 14. Colombia is now part of, America Crece. Has Colombia signed on to the BRI with China, or are you just doing deals?
No. We don't sign to the Belt to that initiative. Not because there's something wrong with it, but because we work in a different environment. And let me give you an anecdote. When a Chinese company won the construction of the subway in Bogota, the State Department and Treasury said, "What happened?" I said, "What happened? They won it fair and square." It was supervised by the IDB and by the World Bank. In the end, the competition was between 2 companies, and the Chinese won. And I said, and for 2 years, I've been trying to get American companies to go back into the region to build infrastructure. American companies left the region. Many, other than oil and energy and other consumer products, infrastructure is gone. I remember when Bechtel Corporation was huge in Latin America. They built power plants, they built dams, they built roads. All of that is gone. So America Crece is looking into getting many of the U.S. Infrastructure companies, which are some of the top in the world, to go back and look into the building of Latin America and the building of infrastructure in Latin America, so that there's a fair competition, and that's where the DFC goes into, and that's where you have both things going into it. We have one project in energy that we want the DFC to promote, which is going to be part of America Crece. We are working very closely to get one infrastructure project too. And part of our job here is going to be go to American providers or American constructors and say, look, come on, it's the right moment, it's the right time to participate in many of those bidding processes. There's a third element in this policy, and it has to do with the arrival of Mauricio Claver to the IDB. Mauricio and his policy and the policy of the administration, which again, we hope it will be maintained, because I think it's a roadmap for success in the future of our societies, is to really make this nearshoring a possibility that can change the economies of our countries. The IDB sort of tends to focus on financing some projects, and he wants to get the IDB more involved in this nearshoring, so that they can start helping American companies grow in the region, or Colombian companies grow in the region, so that a lot of the supply chain that comes from China can be replaced by supply chain, or some of it can be changed by supply chains in the region. So it's a very fascinating moment, and it's a great opportunity.
There are a number of, hundreds of American companies that operate in Colombia, and I think are collectively responsible for 90,000 or so jobs there. I'm wondering, with this initiative, was there any real new money promised, number one? And number two, it does seem to be energy centric, mining, extractive centric, and there have been some criticisms about that, also with the Chinese investment, that so much of Colombia has a lot of so-called mineral appropriate, mining appropriate land, but the environmentalists there are very upset as to the threat of to biodiversity, and the workers and the people in the more remote rural communities, even if you set aside the environmental issues, the question is, are they sharing in the wealth that's generated by that business?
Well, everything has to look. We have a philosophy, and I think it's a philosophy that is the basis of what our economy works and our system works. Is the private sector is the one that provides the richness in the society. If Colombian or American or French foreign investment goes into Colombia, they create better jobs, they pay more taxes, therefore we all win. So it's a very pro-business type of environment that we are creating, that we are controlling, that we want to further, and we think that in that sense, without putting aside environmental issues, etc., which in Colombia are very strong, the system is very strong, etc. But we think we need to promote that type of growth. Otherwise, we're not going to grow. Otherwise, the state cannot create the growth that the private sector does. So we have a very clear way of doing things. One, two, it's not only extractive. No, we're looking at least America Crece. We're looking at road infrastructure, renewable resources company that wants to be created and go into Colombia. We're looking at with the DFC, this hasn't gone through America Crece, but part of this, of the Colombia Crece, a very big investment in oleochemical. You know, we have a very big palm oil industry, but we need to move into the chemistry of it, so that a lot of the pressure that has destroyed lots of pristine jungle, and that hasn't happened in Colombia, in Malaysia, can be produced from Colombia. So there are big opportunities. I remember going in Georgia, two issues in Georgia. And let me add something. Colombia is right now being seen as the last agricultural frontier in the Western Hemisphere. We have more than 50 million hectares that can start producing food, trees, beef for a world that is demanding more and more food. And that's another development in which we can use DFC, in which we can use many of the resources that are being put into this new policy, so that many of those peasants can now become involved in industrial commercialization and industrial production, etc. Because the worst thing that we can do is stay just with survival economy of the peasant. That will just put him into poorness forever and ever. So we're looking also, and there's very big American companies that are starting to look into investing in the rural areas in Colombia. Part of Colombia Crece is investment in 3 areas of coca, where we want to change, not do crop substitution. You cannot do crop substitution. You need to do economic replacement of an illegal industry for a legal industry. So you need to go with roads, you need to go with security, you need to go with products in which private capital can get involved with the peasants there, and they can be profitable in terms of doing legal businesses. So it's a good moment, and certainly I hope, and I've been working, and every time I go to Congress with Democratic congressmen, which I spend half of my time with, I tell them, you know, please understand that America Crece and Colombia Crece needs to be strengthened and can become the initial steps of a great foreign policy of the U.S. in Latin America, and we certainly hope that whomever wins the election will keep moving in that direction, which is the direction that Latin America needs.
You've opened the way to many, many fascinating points for this discussion in the remaining half hour, and I want to encourage the participants at World Affairs Councils around the country to submit the questions via the chat box. I see some coming in now. I'm going to ask one more, and we're talking with, of course, Ambassador Francisco Santos Calderon of Colombia, Ambassador of Colombia to the United States. Sir, one of the other things that makes investment possible is, you know, political and legal stability. And your president, Ivan Duque, campaigned 2 years ago criticizing his predecessor for the dissatisfaction with the peace agreement with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the FARC rebel group. And yet, what the criticisms are now, halfway through the Duque administration, are that there's not been enough effort by the government to protect the rebels, to integrate them, and to pursue agricultural reforms, and to prevent other armed groups from entering the void left by FARC. Some 200, I think it's 200 rebels have been murdered. Other social leaders have been murdered. And this kind of, you know, circumstance would certainly, quite apart from the pandemic, dampen the potential for the Crece initiatives.
Well, sometimes it's even more difficult to implement a peace process and to get to it. If you look at the Friday Agreement 10 years after was still a mess. And this is a project that is for 3 governments, that means 12 years. And it requires huge efforts. Some of them have gone better than others. We have to be realistic. but the biggest problem that we encountered in 2018 when we arrived were two big problems. One, the former administration signed the agreement and kept partying and didn't do anything during the year and a half that they had to implement it. So I'll give you an example. We didn't receive one project with those who had been reinserted from the FARC. Now all of them, the 13,000 members of the FARC are involved in individual or in group projects that finally have put them back to work and to reinsert into society. When we arrived, the municipalities that had been in conflict needed to do special development plans. In that year and a half, they did 3 or 2, I can't remember, and we had to do the other 20 or the other that were needed. So you need to be very organized, because the worst thing that can happen is that you promise and you don't comply. And the promises were so big that we had to tell them, look, there's not enough money for that. Sorry, we can't comply with everything. Look, and so we arrange what the compliance can be with absolute reality and realism. That I think it's very, very important. Which it's easy to sign a blank check if you're not the one who's paying it. We're having to pay that. So we're moving very concretely in many of the areas that the peace agreement required. As a matter of fact, the Kroc Institute in the University of Notre Dame does a matrix of follow-up, and we have complied almost all of the elements, the short-term elements that were needed, including the protection of many of the former FARC leaders, which they're being protected and paid by the state, but certainly some have been killed, and even one is unacceptable. And this has happened because of the second biggest problem that we inherited, which is 200,000 hectares of coca. In 2012, President Santos changed the policy of going really tough after coca, which was being successful precisely when we were having we needed the last push. 60,000 hectares were left. He changed the policy. He dismantled all of the institutionality to fight against coca. And 5 years later, everything we did since 2002 was disappeared. And we had 200,000 hectares of coca with the Mexicans involved, with the groups that weren't part of the peace process, getting huge amount of money of that new coca, and many of the social leaders and those illegal groups. And I think this is part of a shared responsibility that we have. We, during that year and a half of President Santos, they didn't go into the areas that the FARC left. And in the year and a half, and in the 2 years and a half that we've been trying to get hold of those areas, but unfortunately those areas are full of coca, and that dispute for the territory is tremendous. And that's where most of the killings of social leaders and FARC members are. What we have is a special unit in the Attorney General's office that is providing all of the investigation of the FARC leader assassinations. And if you're a Colombian and you're assassinated, or if you're a FARC member and you're assassinated, and this is horrible to say, understand that there's a 50% more, or let me put it this way, 50% of the murders of FARC leaders have been solved, where, when, how, whom, etc., and have been and are in the middle of a judicial process. If you're a civilian in Colombia, that amount is around 20%. But that's not an excuse, and that's not enough, and that's unsatisfactory. But we have, fortunately, moved forward. But the real enemy the real enemy of the peace process is coca cultivation, is the drug lords, and it's the drug business. Those are the elements that are really affecting the stability of those areas. And that's why our policy is so strong and so hard against drug trafficking and against drug cultivation, because we think that's where the money comes to pay for those illegal groups that are killing former FARC members or killing social leaders that are trying to bring that community back to legality.
I want to get into your own experience with that, but beforehand, I have a question from Dan Krasenstein of the Los Angeles World Affairs Council. Dan's very active there, and he asks, many U.S. importers don't realize the Colombia-USA Trade Promotion Agreement eliminated import duties. What resources exist for an American importer to find potential Colombian exporters? Is there a database or matchmaking type of service available?
Yes, there is. There is an office of ProColombia in Los Angeles. ProColombia has persons who will do exactly that for them. What do you want to import? Will connect you and will help you get all of the heavy lifting so that American companies can import into the US. But they also do a lot more. If they want to invest in Colombia, we have another unit that is based here in New York, but that has people all over the States to help American companies that want to be involved in foreign investment in Colombia. And so I would encourage him to go to ProColombia and to work with them. And if it's necessary, we can create sort of an event now that these events are so much easier to do with importers from the West Coast, and see how we can connect them with exporters from Colombia so that we can do some matchmaking.
A question comes from Santa Fe Council on International Relations. This is via email, and Santa Fe Council is hosting next month a Journalism Under Fire conference, their third annual event of that kind. And the question has to do with, for a former journalist like yourself, the state of press freedoms in Colombia, and is your country experiencing the same battles of disinformation and quote unquote fake news as has been reported widely here in this country?
Let me start by press freedom. Yes, we have a wide open press. We have there's absolute freedom. We underwent a huge amount of time where that was not so, especially because of the violence from the coca cartels, the drug cartels. I was kidnapped and I was a journalist. The head of El Espectador was murdered, and he was a journalist. Late middle 80s to early 90s, Colombia was probably one of the worst places to be a journalist. That's not so. Today we have two different threats. One is economic. Newspapers are dying because the newspaper business is I don't know how viable it is in the future. Not the news business, but the newspaper business. So newspapers used to be very, very, very important, and now they're having a very difficult time, just as magazines. What is happening here in the US too? Radio is very profitable in Colombia, and there's a lot of talk and news radio stations that are very popular. They're doing very, very well, most of them. The traditional networks aren't doing as well as they used to do, which is happening. We're not different in that extent to what's happened here. And Colombia has huge engagement in Twitter. It's one of the highest in the world. And yes, we have the same disinformation battles with what I would say a difficult environment in that sense, which is that we don't have the resources, and we don't have the controls, and we don't have many of the watchdogs that you have here to find about this manipulation of social media. So yes, we have it, and it's part of our daily reality. I'll give you an example. I put a tweet, and I will get 80% will just, my poor mother in heaven,
hammer you.
My poor mother in heaven suffers that horribly, and that's only part of what happens in Colombia. But I would say most of
well, you are
America,
known for being usually outspoken, free-thinking
yes.
ambassador. You do have that reputation.
Yes.
There is a question from Angelica Ballestas, which is, and Colombia obviously saw some serious protests in November 9, 2019, before the pandemic. But she asks, what is the government doing to address the social unrest and inequity we're currently seeing today? What is the government doing to mitigate and properly convict perpetrators of feminicide?
Wow. Look, one of the things that happened during those protests was that they began with a dialogue about it, and the government opened a roundtable to talk to them. And all of a sudden, from having some demands that could be met, this exploded into basically, we want the world. And when you move from a mechanism of protest that is valid, that is acceptable, that in democracy is part of everyday life, you open that type of dialogue, you expect, let's see what can be accomplished, and not just sit down. But that didn't come to anything because the demands just grew so much. And in the middle of that discussion, we got again COVID, so we had to stop in this process and to focus on the pandemic. Feminicidio is a very, very, very difficult issue in Colombia. Like I would think in the rest of Latin America, the police has a special unit, and the Attorney General's office has a special unit to prosecute those types of crimes. The police has in this unit, they have people who are specialized in looking into how to manage this type of cases. But it's still something that happens, which is very shameful and which shouldn't. So it's something that we're as a society we're not proud of, but we're doing our best to reduce those types of murders, which are horrible, and which lock into what I would say a fragile element of society.
Thank you, and thank you, Angelica, for those questions. Colombia has received many thousands of refugees from Venezuela, and your government has been extremely disapproving of the Maduro regime and has supported Juan Guaido. There's an election ahead in Venezuela, and you're actually taking on some risk there because they're being supported by Russia and China, and that geopolitical pressure, and Iran can be quite tough in world politics. How do you see the region coming around to address Venezuela and Nicaragua and other problems like that are confronting your government? Look,
Venezuela is a huge threat to democracy in Colombia, and I think the crisis in Venezuela is a survival type of issue for Colombian democracy. So if that doesn't solve and if Colombian democracy doesn't survive, believe me, Central America and the northern tip of South America would be hugely affected. So this is a critical issue for U.S. foreign policy making, a critical issue for Colombia. That's the biggest threat that the region has. One. Two, they don't have elections. most of the leaders of the opposition are in jail or are outside, and so you can't call what they're trying to do elections. It's like you wouldn't call elections when Ceausescu used to get 99% of the votes. It's
Sure.
not an electoral process. It's a sham that will try to legitimize the dictatorship of Maduro. 3, for Cuba, the survival of Maduro is existential, because it distracts the US, because the problems that Cuba has, which are huge. Cuba in 60 years of revolution has not been able to build a sustainable economy. In 60 years. They've had, and it's an island, it's an island with 9 million people. And they're even more poor than they were in 1960, when they could feed themselves. Now they can't. So they need that distraction because internal Cuba is changing. And they understand that the model can't survive. And that what they have with social media, etc. So their investment in Cuba, in Venezuela is huge. And they need that investment to become part of a desestabilization process of all the region. Because they understand that the only way that nomenclatura will survive if the region is in chaos. Otherwise, they have no way, they have no way to go. And so that's, and I think one of the biggest, and I would say one of the biggest mistakes that the Cuban regime did was when the doors were open to become a part of the neighborhood. They said, sure, but we will not change our ways. We will keep undermining democracy in the region, etc. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind in the future. For Russia, is a strategic type of, and Venezuela has become a geopolitical type of battle. For Russia is more of a trying to create problems in the region, keep the US distracted, etc. Iran is very dangerous. Iran is very much, as a matter of fact, when you look at what Venezuela is doing right now, is exactly what Iran did during the sanctions process during the process of sanctions that they've had during decades. So yes, we have a huge mess, and that huge mess, imagine a country with pandemic and with 3 million Venezuelans, a migration as big as the one that Turkey had with the war in Syria.
Yes.
So what President Duque has been able to do is maintain the country in good track with 2 huge problems that sometimes any other government in the region would not have been able to handle.
Yeah, actually, many say that the crisis there is likely to overtake the Middle East and Northern African refugee crisis that passed through Southern Europe.
And they're starting to come back to Colombia. They left, many of the Venezuelans, what we did was we tried to formalize many of them so they could work. But 55% of the Venezuelans were in the informal economy. With the closure of the economy, when you go into lockdown, all those informal employments died. So around 70,000 or 80,000 of Venezuelans went back to Venezuela. They're coming back into Colombia through the trenches. It's not through the legal way, because that's still closed, but we have a 2,000-kilometer border that it's absolutely wide open. So it's a big problem for Colombia. It's a big opportunity too. If we want to develop those 50 million hectares, we're going to need agricultural workers, and those agricultural workers our agricultural sector has gotten very old and has lost many young hands that could work in the agricultural sector that is going to come to Colombia. So I think that's a big opportunity to connect workers with employment that is going to be needed in the near future. And I think Venezuela and Venezuelan migrants will be able to fill in that. But let's not kid ourselves. If the Venezuelan crisis is not solved, democracy is a risk in Colombia, in Ecuador, in Peru, in Panama,
and frankly, the United
Costa
States.
Rica,
And frankly, the United States. I'm wondering about our elections, and I know your role is to deal with both governments, but in 3 areas. You can take them all. We have 5 minutes, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, so if you have further questions, please share them. Looking, first, are you surprised by how the immigration issue is coming to the fore in our final days of this election? Secondly, what do you think of the shattering of norms and frankly, the efforts by the administration to suppress voting? This is something that is unprecedented. And third, you had an awkward moment some months ago when you commented and were eavesdropped on, I guess at a restaurant or somewhere in DC, and made critical comments that were meant to be private about the State Department as being relatively ineffective compared to when you knew it before as vice president, when you were working on human rights and other things, that the department had changed and was not being very effective, and that posed some problems. But we saw Secretary Pompeo in Colombia last month. Are things better at the State Department? So immigration as an election issue, what's happening with our voting protocols, and Secretary Pompeo's visit?
Let me first
tell
let me first tell you that I can't speak about the elections because our policy has always been bipartisan. Look, Plan Colombia in the last 25 years was Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Pastrana, Uribe, Santos, Duque. So it's been bipartisan, and we need to keep that always focus on bipartisan. And as a diplomat, it's an absolute no-no to try to even think about saying anything regarding elections. Migration is always, in all of our countries, it has become a political issue. Yesterday, the mayor of Bogota said, we need to expel any Venezuelan that commits a crime, etc. And she's from the center left. And you see how migration creates a political, quandary that some use in some ways and some use in the other. So this is not the first time that migration becomes part of the political discussion in the U.S. or in my country or in Spain or and it probably won't be the last. And by the way, I work in a government that opened its doors to 3 million migrants from Venezuela.
Yeah. In
a historic and said, we're not going to reject you. We're going to let you come into Colombia because of what is happening in that country. So our attitude towards migration is very positive, but as a political issue, is sometimes used or it can become part of the political discourse and the electoral discourse, and that's just part of the reality of politics. And the last one regarding those discussions. They were in a private place. They were taped, so it wasn't eavesdropping. It wasn't in a restaurant. It was something that was planned. And unfortunately, up until today, I don't know who taped me in a private discussion with the foreign minister, which I think is the issue here. That should have been the issue, that an ambassador cannot discuss in a private room in a hotel, in a private, I don't know how you call it, in a private issues of foreign policy, and they're being taped. I think that's something that I will never stop being surprised that it hasn't been as investigated as it should have been, because that's a spying case. Somebody spied on the ambassador of Colombia speaking to his former foreign minister in a private place at the Mandarin Hotel where we were having a discussion. So for me, that's something that is very, very surprising. And I hope one day in my life I will be able to find out who ordered that taping and why and how it got
Well,
into Colombia. But
obviously,
so far,
your government has confidence in you, and they refuse to accept your resignation. And personally, it sounds like you've been through much worse when you were kidnapped.
oh yeah.
So, which is a conversation for another time, certainly, because that's just, I'm sure, well, if you do share about that, that's very personal. I would like to give the last word to a colleague from the council system, and it reverts to the Venezuela discussion. So it's a good place to close our conversation today, Ambassador. From your point of view, is it correct to assume that oil is still the, quote, pull from Iran, Russia, and China? It seems so retrograde. What is the attraction for those countries to Venezuela otherwise? And are they the main reason that Maduro is able to hold on to power?
Yes, that's the main reason why Maduro is maintaining power. It's not oil anymore. It's creating a geopolitical crisis in a region so near the US so that the US will be distracted. That's what they are playing at. For Cuba, as I said before, is survival. And as a matter of fact, Cuba was getting, I think, 400,000 barrels of oil for free when they could produce oil, which they can't now. So, and that's why right now Cuba is in a huge crisis because they can't, they haven't been able to get that free, the free ride that they were getting from President Chavez and President Maduro. But what Venezuela has become is a geopolitical crisis in which Chinese interests, Iran's interests, Russia's interests, Cuba's interests, Colombia's interests, Brazil's interests, and the US interests are intertwined. Mm-hmm. And that's how big this situation has become.
Ambassador Santos, it's really been a pleasure to spend an hour with you this afternoon, and we thank you for being part of Embassy Row Live with the World Affairs Councils of America. We've recorded this conversation, and we'll certainly send it to the embassy for your review, and we'll post it to the worldaffairscouncils.org website. We really appreciate it and hope that we can facilitate engagements with you around the country at our World Affairs Councils. We have 90 across the country. And we wish you luck. We look forward to your analysis of our election and to keeping in touch.
For analysis of the election?
Well, if your embassy comments on it, yeah. we look forward to that.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you so much. Good night, good afternoon, everybody. Bye-bye.